Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all here, a robust group despite some kind of wild times outside. So first of all, we're really glad you're here. My name is Lisa Van Dusen, and I'm on the staff team here at SV2. So you all know you're in the right place. This is the second session in our three-part series called Pathways to Opportunity. And today's focus is about community schools and the integrated approach that they're taking. So we're really thrilled to have an amazing lineup of panelists and our moderator here today. And for those of you that aren't familiar with SV2, I wanted to share just a very brief overview so that you know a little bit about us. We are a community of individuals, of more than 200 individuals who've come together to be more effective givers, to learn and to then pool resources and invest in promising and innovative nonprofits and social mission companies. So our mission, which all of that helps fulfill, is unleashing the resources and talents of the Bay Area community to achieve social impact. And we're doing that in service of creating a more equitable and sustainable Bay Area where everyone thrives. If you haven't seen it already, I wanted to just give a plug for our latest impact report, which shares more detail about how we do that, and the organizations that we support are really remarkable. Those of you at the fall gathering got to hear from some of them. So anyway, we welcome all of you. We've got panelists, and then we'll have opportunity for Q&A. Before that, Linda Laser will be setting some context for this and what we're doing, how this relates to our grant round. And then you'll be doing some thinking about how this fits into that. I would like now to invite Linda up, who's going to share, again, some context for what we're doing here today.
Yeah, so welcome everybody, and thank you, Lisa. I am so excited that everybody is here. This is our second learning session, and I know many of you, and I think it's going to be just amazing today. This is a topic pretty near and dear to my heart. So after I give this brief overview of the grant round, I'm going to go straight into the panel. And just for those of you that weren't here at the first session, just to create what we're doing here, we're doing something a little different. Where the fall we're going to do learning sessions, and then in the spring, based on what we learn, we're going to pick topics for our grant round in the spring. And we've got a lot of feedback from the partner survey and as part of our business plan that people really wanted to look at things systemically. And so we really are taking more of a systemic approach to understanding how can we make a true difference to address poverty and inequality in the Bay Area. And we're looking at evidence-based approaches. And if you may remember, for those of you who took part in the education grant round last year, the learning round, I'll say, we actually had one of our speakers, Amy Gerstein from Stanford, mention community schools as one of the top evidence-based approaches that works. So that was key feedback. It's partly why this topic was here, but it's also a very comprehensive and integrated approach, which is another theme of this grant round that we'll just talk about. So thinking about just a little bit, we sort of did this as a very simplistic diagram to just say this really is a systemic issue. And so the two predominant pathways out of poverty that most people talk about are ones that are either a pathway out of poverty through education or through career and workforce development. But I think as many of us in the room that volunteer or have experience in high needs communities know, that really the intersection of that with also what's happening in their lives when they go home and in their communities around basic needs, and in the Valley particularly acute because of the affordable housing crisis, is you have to look at the whole thing as a system. And if you look, we looked at several programs that were sort of crossing even some of those circles, and look at community schools. It's sitting right in the center of all of it, right? And so that's why we're really excited about this topic. And I just want to mention a couple things quickly. From the first panel, if you remember, we had some pretty amazing statistics. And for those of you that were here, I'll just mention a couple of them, which is we have probably the biggest inequality almost anywhere right here in the Bay Area. And one of the things that was cited, for instance, was just the difference in the percentage of students that are in free reduced lunch programs in neighborhoods that are side by side in the Bay Area. So like some of the stats that were thrown out last time was free reduced lunch number of students in Palo Alto is 9%, and Saratoga is 1%, and East San Jose is 82 to 85%. And then we also heard in the last panel that because of the way we do funding in California, where we have school funding, public school funding, happening even from the state, but it's happening fairly city by city. And as a result, the dollar per student between these neighborhoods is also quite different. I won't go into the details on this. There's been a lot of help with the local control accountability funding to try to close some of that gap, but still, typically the dollar per student difference between schools is 20 to 30% higher in higher income neighborhoods versus ones that are not. And that's why when Rick Williams talked about teacher salaries being lower in low income neighborhoods, but it's also going to be part of the topic today, which is there's less services in those schools. Less services in schools that need these services even more. And so I had an opportunity to actually do focus groups with teachers around the Bay Area and poverty communities last spring. And you would expect a high issue that came up on the list is the fact they're getting paid very little and barely making it on cost of living. But you know that actually wasn't even their number one issue. Their number one issue was the fact they needed more effective supports and services for just the high number of high needs children that they were trying to serve. And so again, I know many of you volunteer in these communities. I think we all see just what these children from a very young age and these families, the ability to overcome the odds and the fact to bring alongside the right set of services and supports from family engagement to health to the kind of after-school services we talked about here today, just has a huge potential to put these children and these families on a path to poverty. And that's why I'm so excited about having the panel here today, because they're all experts in this area. So we're going to have, as you know, another learning session on the other pathway, workforce development and career, on November 2nd. And for some of you that are interested, I'm going to have a slide on this in a second. I'd love to invite some of you to be on a research team with us to capture all the learnings out of that. And then we're going to have a meeting in December to catalyze, sort of to crystallize all of our learnings and pick a couple of areas out of all of that we'll do our grant round. So if some of you are interested, if you just send me an email, Alison or an email, or reach out to Jody and just let us know. It's not going to be a hard commitment to be on a research team if you're interested, because I'm going to actually do the work to take all the learnings out of all the learning sessions and the research, and I'm going to sort of create a synthesized version of all that. But having a group of people that can look at that and review that, but also then start populating some nonprofits that fit against those category areas that have come up the highest, so that when we do come together in December, we can have that for the partner community as a whole to look at. So if any of you have a really like that and have a heart for that, I would love it if some of you would join with us to sort of do that piece of work on in-between learning sessions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over because I am very excited about this panel, and I'm going to turn over to Lisa and to all of the great people that are doing this amazing work in our communities.
Great. Well, we have really some outstanding leaders with us today, and we're really excited about this panel. The North Bay fires have disrupted a lot of lives, including one of our panelists whose doctor's orders said she shouldn't be driving here from Oakland. So Lisa Villareal is joining us from her offices there. Thank you so much. Can you hear us, Lisa?
I can.
All right.
You hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, great.
That's great. So we're hoping today's discussion is going to give all of us a deeper understanding of both the benefits and the challenges of this particular approach to education reform called community schools. We're going to have an opportunity to dive deeper into two local models, and then we're going to finish up with some questions about funding and impact. So you have right around your tables longer bios of all of our guests. So I'm just going to do short introductions of everyone, including we asked everyone to give us a fun fact about them so we can kind of get a sense of their side, the sides of them outside of their professional backgrounds. So let me start with Lisa Villareal, who is joining us from Oakland, where she is the CEO of Youth Ventures Joint Powers Authority. She's also a longtime leader of the National Coalition of Community Schools, where she chairs the steering committee. And really fun fact about Lisa, her grandfather was a 14-year-old water boy in the armies of the Mexican revolutionary leader, Pancho Villa. How do you spell that, or pronounce that? Pancho
Villa.
Yeah, Pancho Villa.
Yeah.
And
Pancho Villa.
my Spanish isn't very good.
No, you're doing fine.
But as a child, she had the opportunity to visit her grandparents in Mexico, and she would hear them talking late at night about issues of continuing concern, social justice, and the future of the Mexican people. Meredith Liu is the president, COO, and co-founder of the primary school, which is a new school model that integrates health and education. Their first site is in East Palo Alto, and it's just finished, it's in your second year of operation with 250 children ages 0 to 5. A fun fact about Meredith, she actually has an identical twin who also works in education as a civil rights attorney. And then finally, Jana Kiser, who is with us from Redwood City 2020, where she is the director of this collective impact effort that supports the success of youth and families and strengthens the community in Redwood City. In her past, Jana has also served as a community school coordinator. And fun fact about her is she's half Puerto Rican and lived there when she was a child, and she's still an avid salsa dancer. We won't ask you to. So I'd like to start off, Lisa, by asking you to give us some background and context. What is a community school, and what is the thinking behind the model?
Sure, happy to do so. And again, thank you for letting me join. I'm actually from my home in Richmond.
Oh, okay.
And I say that because if you hear a loud dog barking, that's my National Guard laying right next to me. She gets really concerned when I'm sick, and so I appreciate you letting me pipe in like this. I think in order to describe what a community school is and how they have developed, it's important to know a little bit about the history of community schools. And it may come as a surprise to some of you to learn that the history of community schools actually goes back to the history of public education in the United States. And I'm really talking about the period of time in mid to late 1800s, early 1900s, when public schools were established all over the country. Some states were signing on with mandatory public education before others were. But if you remember in your history, the late 1800s, early 1900s, we had an industrial revolution where mechanical technologies forced tens of thousands of people, mostly immigrants, many of them poor, off of the farms and ranches, and they came streaming into the cities for work, for a better way of life, and to learn how to live the American way. And in many ways, we had similar challenges then as we do now. And what happened was, as public schools developed, this sense of school as the center of community life really emerged, and you can learn more about that if you take a look at the work of John Dewey. In fact, there's a book called Dewey's Dream, written by Ira Harkavy from the University of Pennsylvania, that does a really good treatment of that. Then we also had the concerns about the condition of children, their hunger, their health, their mental health, and their ability to function in the world. And the settlement house movement started, Jane Addams and others establishing Hull House in Chicago and really bringing the notion of social services into the schools. And this was the way that we did school. Up until 1978, if you take a look at the various eras, you look at the era of the New Deal under FDR, and we had food programs and medical screening and nurses in the schools and social workers in the schools. If you look at the civil rights movement with the passage of legislation to guarantee bilingual education and affirmative action and instructional aids, as well as the Great Society ushered in by Lyndon Johnson, where we established the National Endowment for the Arts and Arts in Music, the War on Poverty. We ushered in food stamps, Medi-Cal, Medicaid, unemployment, Social Security, public housing, many of the guarantees that we take for granted all came into being in the early 60s and became part of the fabric that created one of the richest American societies that we have really ever seen. In fact, economists will tell you that we came the closest to closing the achievement gap, the education gap, the income gap, the employment gap, and the housing gap during the period of time from about 1958 to 1978. The civil rights movement created an equal opportunity for all children, and it was working very well. The best, arguably the best schools in the world were American schools, and we would say, as a native Californian, I would say some of the best schools in the nation were California schools. And this was borne out in fact by test scores and many other things. There had been a strong literacy focus, a strong focus on STEM, because there was a Cold War with the USSR, the former Soviet bloc. We weren't about to let those socialists show us up in terms of how we took care of our people, how we took care of our families, how we took care of our children. And it was a point of pride to be able to have a full-time school nurse, a full-time social worker, a full-time school psychologist, an officer-friendly known by name. I remember ours, his name was Matt. This was down in Anaheim, California, and a fireman, as well as strong after-school programs. I took trumpet lessons for free, and I checked out a musical instrument after school. And we also had 8 weeks of summer school, and this was free. Summer school enrichment, not just 2 weeks of remedial math or remedial reading because you were in danger of failing class, but 8 full weeks of summer school across the state of California. School counselors existed in all schools, and school counselors in high schools. We had dynamic college and career centers, not just something that's open at noontime, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 1 hour for those eagerly wanting to attend college anyway. And we had the notion of the American dream was really becoming a reality. And if we want to talk about making America great again, and I'm serious about this, we want to talk about making America great again, we had to start looking back at all the things that made America great and made American schools great. So the community schools movement, the modern community schools movement, was really born in the early 90s. And we began taking a look at this notion that after 1978, when the U.S. Department of Education split off from health, education, and welfare and stood on its own, that we began to return to just the most basics in schools, reading and mathematics, and all of the other supports and services that I just enumerated really began to be cut away in favor of tax breaks, starting with the great tax revolt of 1978, Proposition 13 in California. And so one of the things that people don't realize is that not only did this hurt poor kids because they didn't have the enrichment opportunities and the opportunity for supports and services and social work and nursing and all of that in the schools, it also hurt the well-to-do. And it hurt the well-to-do because instead of having all of these supports and services at school where their kids could try things out and try out music and the arts, they had to go out and pay for all of it privately. Private lessons for everything, for gymnastics, for music. I mean, did you ever think that you would have to put your child in a year-round softball or year-round baseball traveling program, so expensive, just to get a look for a good high school or for a good college? But that's what you have to do today. You know that's true. Whether you have children or whether you have grandchildren, they have to do the year-round travel teams. That's not how it used to be. These were all publicly funded. So let me say that what has grown to be the community school are schools now that include before and after school programs, tutoring, counseling and mentoring, health and mental health services, innovative college readiness programs and apprenticeships, strong after-school programs in summer school, strong parental involvement, strong kindergarten readiness, and strong collaboration between teachers, providers, and public-private partnerships. But they're all a little different. Some have family resource centers, some don't. Some have food banks, some don't. Some have emergency clothes closets. Some don't. Some have washers and dryers for their families, and some don't. And why is this? Because of local control. Because when you do your community assessment and you determine what your local community wants in their community school, those become the component, elementary and necessary parts of creating a community school. Today we have community schools in over 30 states across the United States. We have hundreds of them in California that have followed on to strong after-school programs and strong Healthy Start programs in the 90s and early 2000s. There's also a national coalition for community schools. And the results really amount to improving the necessary conditions for learning to give every kid a fair shot at a good life. So I'll stop there and pass it to the next person.
Thank you. Thank you. Jana, Redwood City has 6 community schools, and Redwood City 2020 has been with them since their inception. So would love to hear more about kind of what those models look like and kind of how they have evolved over time.
Be delighted to share that. Lisa, thank you for that strong overview about community schools as a whole. I want to acknowledge that I've been with my family in communities that have been very impacted by the fires, and my voice has been impacted by the air. And so, particularly for people in the back, if you're having a hard time hearing me, just give a wave and I'll aim to speak up. But we'd like to make sure that you understand the context of community schools within the local Redwood City and North Fair Oaks communities. Redwood City and North Fair Oaks are special places in lots of different ways, one of which is the tremendous depth of collaboration and partnership that happens in these communities. Since the early 90s, as Lisa underscored, the community has come together to think about how people could work cross-sector and cross-system to ensure that young people and their families are thriving. And also to work together to mitigate really big challenges like the effect of poverty and inequity in the community. And so Redwood City 2020 is indeed a collective impact organization. The idea is that community partners from the social sector, so our core, work together. And our core partners include local government, so both the city of Redwood City and the county of San Mateo are core partners of Redwood City 2020. Within the county system, the health system and the human service agencies are their key partners within the county who work on the collaborative. As most know probably in the room, Redwood City does not have a unified school district. And so within the collaborative, it becomes a site where people can work cross-system as well. So we have a strong partnership from both the Redwood City School District and the Sequoia Union High School District and Cañada College. So the intention is to work across these systems of schooling that are in town. We also have local funders participating as core partners, so Kiser Permanente, the Sequoia Healthcare District, and others are core partners of Redwood City 2020. And then we also have academic partners from Stanford University. So I'm delighted to hear that many of you heard Amy speak recently, the director of the John W. Gardner Center. And the Gardner Center is also a core partner. And so those organizations and agencies that I just mentioned make up what we call the backbone of our collective impact work. So the Redwood City 2020 itself is made up of these partners. There are also hundreds of nonprofits and community-based organizations that do the work that we organize and convene, receive funding, and also are partners in collaborating with young people and their families. And so within the context within our town, this collaboration started in the early 90s as people were forecasting the year 2000 and thought, what can we do to make change to ensure that people are safe and secure and thriving here? And community schools was the first project that the collaborative took on. As Lisa mentioned, a number of different community school efforts started with Healthy Start grants, and that happened for Redwood City 2020. And so initially, the schools that are now community schools had family resource centers, And there was a bit of separation between the school and the Family Resource Center. It was more of a co-location model, thinking that you could have community services on campus, kind of back to the spirit of some of the best years of education, as Lisa was highlighting earlier. But these schools have evolved into full-service community schools, where the idea is that the form of education is changing. And the intention is to have a 360-degree view of young people and their families. So looking at the whole person, the whole child, the whole family, recognizing that all of our needs and strengths need to be taken into account if we're really going to be thriving, successful community members. So for what that looks like in practice is that at our community schools, there are often more than 50 nonprofits working right on campus. It's a coordinated, integrated model, so it's not just co-location. It's way beyond that. The idea is that there are core leaders on site whose job it is to integrate and to coordinate the efforts so that there are systemic changes both on campus but also within the family structure to ensure that people are thriving. Factors of the whole child or the whole family that are taken into account include safety net needs, which include housing, food, transportation. Lots of different health care is provided right on campus, ranging from mental health to physical health. I'm delighted to hear people talking about health vans and others in our icebreaker. That's still happening at community schools. There's also deep partnership with families, and so the intention is to have not only adult education happening on campus. So for example, at many of our community schools, Kenyatta College professors are offering English classes and computer classes and financial literacy classes right on campus. So community members can come and learn alongside their children. But there are also all sorts of parenting classes and nutrition and a variety of cognitive play groups so that parents can enhance their skills as first teachers at home. There's deep awareness that the community, family, and schools need to work together to ensure that young people are successful in the community. So in addition to what I've already mentioned, there's also immigration support, all kinds of public benefit navigation and advocacy, and much more happening on campus. And so the idea is that these schools are not open just in the traditional 8 to 3 time frame, but they're open from early morning until quite late at night, 7 days a week. Particularly Monday through Friday, but there also are programs, particularly in the summer and sometimes throughout the year on the weekends. We do have community schools, as Alison was mentioning, within the Redwood City School District, and now there's an emerging trend for us, and that we've, again, the community schools in Redwood City started in the early 2000s, and 2 years ago we did a deep dive strategic planning process with about 50 community-based organizations and partners to look at what now for our community schools. And there was a vision born at that time to expand and sustain the community schools from cradle to career. And so now we have a high school community school, our first, and our understanding is this the first in the county at Redwood High School. We also have community school strategies that are starting from birth to career. So looking at, for example, a holistic approach to services. So there's a continuity of services and data shared. Good job. You protected. And then, again, the collaborative itself initially incubated and started the community schools, and now serves a number of other different roles as the community schools have kind of essentially popped out of the incubator in the Redwood City School District into district hands. And our approach is a bit different than it once was. And so even this new high school community school has started within the Sequoia Union High School District and is led by Sequoia Union High School District staff, but is backed by all these community partners. And so Redwood City 2020 serves a variety of different roles for community schools today. A few of those are that we convene partners to support community schools and align strategic efforts. We certainly serve as an intermediary funder and as a fundraising partner, and that we want to make sure that our community schools are financially sustainable as well. We also provide all kinds of different professional development opportunities for our partners that support community school efforts. So an example of that is that we're offering really innovative best practices and family engagement through the collaborative so that these strategies that are working at some schools can expand throughout our network. There's also a big role in data linking that the collaborative has served from the very beginning. And so we are continuing to look at how we can help ensure that data and impact evaluation is continuous throughout our spectrum. And we're still innovating and incubating projects. And so, for example, again, this high school community school project was incubated within the collaborative in partnership with our partners. We are co-leading the Big Lift effort, which is helping to serve the lower end of the developmental spectrum from our cradle to career pipeline. And so we're co-leading that with the Redwood City School District, which I know many in the room are familiar with the collective impact work that's within the Big Lift umbrella. We also are creating a welcoming environment in the community, recognizing that families, particularly immigrant families, need to be safe and welcome to maximize and partner at our school sites. And so there's big effort underfoot through community dialogue and art, and in partnership with young people like Dreamers, for example, at Sequoia High School. Leaders are partnering together to ensure that empathy and understanding is created across class and race lines. And so that's just a brief overview of what the community schools look like in Redwood City. But again, the intention is that we're certainly holding these anchors from kindergarten through 8th grade, but also aiming to both expand down the developmental pipeline and also up.
Great. Thanks. Meredith, with the primary school, you're really pioneering a new model. So we'd love to hear about the thought process of conceiving and developing it and kind of what you're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are not technically a community school, but are very inspired by a lot of the same things that Jana and Lisa were talking about. And I thought it might be helpful to start by just talking about what problems are we trying to solve, because I really appreciate the statistics on what poverty looks like, but it's so much deeper than that. So we are in East Palo Alto, which is a 95% FRL district, but I just came from the school today, and I am very distracted. I got an email last night that one of our 2-year-olds is living in a car with her mom. We have another kid that I just saw whose mom committed suicide last year. We have about a dozen families with a close family member facing deportation right now. We have a mom who was almost evicted from her home because her ex-boyfriend beat her and punched all the windows out of her house. And these are not extreme cases. Like, there are, what we know about adverse childhood experiences, about 20% of all adults have 4 or more of traumatic events in their life. And so when we talk about why community schools exist, it's not just for enrichment opportunities, it's because how can you come to school and learn if you have this going on at home? And that's what the primary school was founded to start to address. Is both my co-founder is a pediatrician, and from the health side, she saw kids every day that she couldn't keep healthy, she couldn't make well, because you can't come to an appointment once a year and heal a child who is living in conditions like this. And we feel the same way about school. Your best school may be well set up to support a child who has a stable home, but is absolutely insufficient to support a child who is going through even the basics of poverty, let alone some of the things that we have kids who are going through. And so when we started the primary school, we sat down and said, what is wrong with our current system? It was great to hear the history, because it sounds like we've gotten even more broken over time. At least we were there at some point. But if you said, look at these kids, it's not 1%, say it's 20% of kids, it's a lot. What would you do to reform the systems to be able to support those kids? And so our model has 3 major premises. The first is that you have to start earlier. So here in California, I come from DC, where we've had preschool since I was in preschool. So school starts at 5. We know that the majority of brain development happens before kids even enter school. And particularly when you think about trauma and what that does to your brain, we are talking about deeply embedding into a child's biology things that are very difficult to reverse after that. So the first part of our model is that you have to get to kids earlier. So we admit our kids at or before birth. The second thing is that you have to think about the whole child, as the Redwood City program is thinking about. It's not academics only. A child's socio-emotional well-being, their physical health, their mental health, what they're passionate about, it's all part of what makes up a whole child. And if you don't think about a child that way and don't address their needs in that manner, we're going to miss something. We cannot talk about just learning math if something else is going on with that kid here, or even in their physical health. So we address the whole child, and by doing so, we really bring multiple systems together, including the healthcare system and the education system. And then the third part is that we think that you cannot work around parents. I worked in so many schools who try to do everything they can in spite of parents or in spite of the home life, and we think that all parents want the best for their children, and all parents are powerful beyond measure. And we use that as an asset, and we take advantage of that parents have these amazing skills and want the best for their kids. So what that looks like in practice is that every parent has a coach. We specifically call it a coach and not a case manager, a social worker, or a therapist, because parents are adults who are responsible for their lives. And so the coach is there to help you identify what your goals are and support you in achieving them. The other thing we do is we bring parents together in groups, because a lot of our families suffer from social isolation, like all of us do. And so we're not only building a community where they connect with us, but where they connect with each other and can do amazing things by supporting each other. And then, like the community schools do, we also connect parents to concrete resources, so housing, immigration, food, mental health, other needs. So we're really creating that stable home. So that's so essentially how it came together in practice is really trying to build those three things. We're still very much in the early stages of working on it, but we now have children and their families between the ages of 0 and 5. Our full-time school starts at 3, so 3 floors of 5s, where we have really integrated health services, really integrated parent supports, and a very strong trauma-informed socio-emotional supports for all children. And then in our early program, we start with parents when the kids are very young, and we work on supporting them to build healthy attachment with their children, to get kids into play groups so that they're building socialization skills with each other. And then we work really closely with the healthcare system to have a really comprehensive view of what a child's health needs are, so we can intervene early and often. So in the school, what that looks like is vision, hearing, and dental screening, as well as speech screening, mental health supports. We're doing kind of executive function screening as well. And then we'll either connect to the existing healthcare system, other partners in the community. We also work with a huge number of partners to bring these sports together. And then in the early years, we're spending a ton of time with our kids and their families, screening for both things like social needs at home that would have a strong impact on child development or direct child development. And again, we work with a really strong network of partners who can provide various supports. So we are in our second year, and it is very hard, and we have a lot to learn. We still really stand behind this vision of bringing all these things together, really we think about it as putting the child at the center instead of the systems. Like, we're built in these silos of systems that don't really care about not that they don't care about who the child is, but they're not connecting around the child. They're focused in their own lanes, and we're saying child needs to come first. Let's put the child in the middle, and that's the core of the model.
Very similar in terms of that approach, child and family centered. So some community schools have been really very successful in terms of also supporting children's academic growth and seeing real progress in terms of academic outcomes. Others don't seem to be making that kind of progress. And I was curious in terms of your thoughts and observations about why that was. Lisa, do you have some thoughts about that? Nope.
It's about why some are successful in terms of
Academic
achievement.
progress, yes.
Well, so there have been a number of studies done on this, starting in the 90s with the Healthy Start and the California School Restructuring Initiatives. And the studies indicated at the time, and continue to confirm, that if you start down the road of community schools as wraparound, intensive supports and services, connecting the dots and providing all the things that children need to level the playing field, but there's no integration with the school day, with the curriculum and instruction, and with the whole instructional efforts that are going on, then you might be able to bring students up to median, but you're not gonna push them any farther. And other studies have been done around intensive academic interventions that don't have anything like community schools, that don't even have wraparound, don't even have any co-location, supports and services, health or mental health, or trauma-informed instruction or restorative justice, and they can only get so far, and only with the brightest students who are probably doing a lot of academic learning on their own. They've got computers, spend times in libraries. And so it really is the integration of the community school approach with the regular school day, as has been stated, that the sort of magic begins to happen. And that magic can include some very early wins in improved attendance, both for students and for teachers, reductions in suspensions and expulsions. And we know that attendance is such a huge proxy for so many factors. And attendance is a big proxy for reading and grade level and reading comprehension. Attendance is a big proxy for successful matriculation between 8th grade and 9th grade. And attendance is a very strong proxy for who's going to be able to graduate. In fact, the studies on chronic absenteeism indicate that the early chronic absenteeism sets a pattern for life, for success or not only in school, but in work. So I would say that it's the full integration of community schools with the curriculum and instruction and the educational leaders that makes the difference.
Jana, what about in Redwood City, where I think there's been some variation in terms of at least test performance publicly reported?
Sure. Well, I would certainly echo what Lisa just said, of that, again, the model has evolved in Redwood City from more of a co-location without an integration and without the coordination and integration with the school day, to a model that is very integrated to the school day. And as that's happened, as it's progressed, certainly academic gains have also followed. But another piece that I would add that Lisa touched on a little bit too is that the way that schools are partnering with families has also evolved over time within this community school movement. If I can be candid, I think in the old days, in the early thinking around community schools, it was what Meredith shared earlier, that is doing these wraparound supports to serve families, and sometimes perhaps in the worst of cases, in spite of families. But today, I think, at least in our community school practitioners are doing things in partnership with families. So it's not looking at only the needs and let's be clear that, Meredith, I'm glad that you underscored the personal side, that, I think all three of us are deeply aware that the personal is traumatic, the personal is hard. The trauma of immigration, particularly in the new context that we're in with the national administration that we have in place right now, has a direct impact on people's well-being. And certainly the effects of poverty are not new in any way and are ongoing and serious. That being said, our socioeconomically poorest communities are also locations of tremendous wealth, resource, resiliency, leadership, and partnership. That I think as schools really authentically partner with families rather than looking at family engagement as some sort of participation-based model, we have seen academic gain follow. So what we have seen in Redwood City, for example, is that as families have engaged at school and at home, recognizing that a lot of family engagement does not happen on the school site, it happens at home. But also as families have engaged at the school site, as school sites have transformed, as they've been locations of genuine partnership, welcome, and respect and dignity, and families' resources and strengths and assets are really recognized, the effects on children are really clear. So for example, attendance goes up in our Redwood City context as family engagement goes up. And as Lisa was just highlighting, attendance, as we all know, is a huge component to long-term success. We also know that students' sense of care at school increases as family engagement increases, which makes sense. It's this like community-wide village approach to schooling where there is not this big gulf between school and home, but instead a bridge and a partnership between school and home that can be incredibly powerful. So I think that in addition to the integration during the school day, for me, one of the biggest levers would be innovative, practical family engagement that's really partnership-based, knowing that, study after study is showing that this is one of the magic components to students doing well is when their families are really engaged in their education and see a place for themselves, regardless of their own experience with formal schooling, regardless of their own country of origin, regardless of the language that they speak, when they are fully welcomed into the school. And to have that happen, frankly, schools need to change. The system is not set up to fully partner with families, particularly poor families or non-English speaking families. And so as schools have evolved and as systems have changed and as this cross-sector work is happening, it also doesn't just change the school environment, but it changes the healthcare experience. When families are seen as partners, that also changes the way that they're treated, say, in county offices for receiving public benefits. And all of these partners, as they're evolving and changing their practice and really disrupting the systems that they're in, outcomes improve for young people. But that's hard work.
Well, and it sounds very much like that's the work that you're trying to start from the very beginning with your families. I wonder if you could just briefly tell us about some of the ways that you're trying to measure progress and success, and how you're sort of supporting the data collection among that to support that integration.
Yeah, it's been really challenging. I think one thing is that we really state that we have 3 areas of child outcomes. We call them academic, health, and soul. Soul is our socio-emotional, and I think one thing on kind of the last question that we've seen is that I think there's been created a false dichotomy between either you're an academically rigorous school or you're a community school, or either you care about grades or you care about trauma. And one thing that we're really trying to do is say, no, you need both together. And our friends at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative are working very hard at helping folks understand that there's a comprehensive view of a child. And so what we are doing is measuring, it's hard too because our kids are really young, so we're trying to measure our interim outcomes and then try to have this really clear framework of what does it mean for long-term success. So these 3 areas that we have is what we think, we say we want children to have productive, meaningful, happy lives, and that includes being healthy. It includes the option of going to a 4-year college and succeeding there if you want, but we really have also kind of a broader definition of purpose as well, because just getting grades is not enough. So what we've started to do is track kind of early outcomes. So for each of our grade levels, we have measures in each of these categories that again are early, but that are developmentally appropriate and would measure kind of a range of how a child is doing. We have found them to be a little too rough almost in terms of being able to get to what we really need, and so we're going a little deeper on these interim measures. As an example, we really feel like for our children, self-regulation is the most important thing that we're working on in the socio-emotional realm, so we're piloting some executive function measures with them right now. We are also started, I mentioned speech screening, because language development is a huge issue in for our lower income kids and high trauma kids, so we're piloting that as well. And then we work with the healthcare system to collect a range of more developmental screening data, things like the ASQ if you're familiar with that, so that we can really have this really robust set of data, which will eventually tell us a little more about what we should even know about. Because even with there's not even a clear definition of kindergarten readiness in this country right now, and so we don't even have a baseline to work from like we would for older kids, so it's definitely a work in progress.
Last question. We wanted to end this panel discussion with a question about impact. And I know this is really a tough one because you've all talked about comprehensive services, but we're asking each of you if you could, at this point in time, which of the services and support that within the realm of the work that you're doing, which would you say as the 3 most important? And as I say, I think it's within the context of today. Jana, you mentioned already integrated family engagement. So maybe you want to start and let us know your other two.
I guess I would actually just add on to that one a little bit in that I think that it's also really important to recognize that really terrific family engagement and partnerships can happen in all contexts, both in small innovative schools and also in large public schools that have the legacy of public education really embedded within their ethos. So I'd like to just give a concrete example of that at Hoover Community School, which is a pre-K through 8 community school in Redwood City, 100% of the children receive free and reduced lunch. About 90% are Latino students, many of whom are coming from immigrant families that are recent arrivees. It hurts my head, but often in conferences, these are families who are described as hard to reach in the public system. And at Hoover, in a site where we were really piloting some of our best family engagement work, the numbers dramatically changed of families being actively involved on campus. So again, we want to recognize that deep, important family engagement work happens at home. But if we just look at what's happening on campus and people taking classes involved in homeschool communication, leading projects, being active agents of learning for their young people at school. At the beginning, there were about 27% of families or students had families who were actively engaged in that way. Within a 3-year period, it changed from 27% to 97%. And these are hard to reach families. It wasn't a miracle. It happened because practice changed. The environment changed on campus. There was, again, this ethos of dignity and respect and genuine mutual service where community schools need to be beyond one directional service, right? They're not just sites where people come get help. They're also sites where people give help and have opportunities or locations where they can use their talents. And so that's huge because, again, what we're seeing is that when families are engaged, outcomes improve for students. So I think the other piece that is particularly poignant here is that when families engage, then our wraparound services are also a lot more effective. So we know that, for example, in this area, as housing prices have skyrocketed, other areas of a family's budget are deeply impacted. And it's shocking that food insecurity is a real issue here in Silicon Valley. It's sick that people are hungry in this context. But in a school site that's offering all kinds of different food programming, if that food programming is not respectful and dignity-based, it's really difficult for families to come get that help at a school. And so as we see the culture of family engagement changing, then we also see, for example, at that same school, in the years where the family engagement really improved, more than 100,000 pounds of food was delivered to families at the school site. And so that's in partnership, but really it was because there is food available here and there's big need. And so when we really transform a community into one that is, a community school into one that's based on authentic partnership, then everything else improves too, right? Then all of a sudden services are maximized. Families are able to get support for the trauma. So we also know that there's a big stigma against getting mental health support. So having an environment of partnership and kind of humility and that everybody needs help, including teachers, including school staff, then families are also a lot more open to receiving help that they need to handle the trauma and the effects of poverty that are impacting their lives. So I would say that linchpin, one of them anyway, is family engagement, and then it has this ripple
effect. Meredith, your thoughts, 3 levers.
Mental health, housing, and childcare.
Did everyone hear that?
No. Mental health, 100% for children and families in deep and both deep and shallow ways. Housing, I would maybe give all 3 to housing if I could, except housing is causing mental health issues for our families. And childcare, because without childcare, we can't build strong attachment relationships and our parents can't work so that they can get out of poverty.
Lisa, your thoughts?
So this is really hard. You're not going to like my first answer. The first answer is we have to really take a look at what the community is asking for. And I'll give you a couple of examples. If there's a graffiti problem, they need arts opportunities. If there's a drug and alcohol problem, they need wellness and mindfulness for kids and parents. If there's school violence, they need restorative justice and trauma-informed instruction. If there's a literacy problem, you need programs like Street Side Stories and Youth Speaks. But if I had to narrow it to three that I've been seeing for the last 20 years, it would indeed be health and mental health services, including restorative justice and trauma-informed instruction. This is for parents and for kids. The second one would be extended day and summer enrichment for the kids with economic development and job development for parents. So I see those as tandem. Enrichment, summer school, after school for kids, economic development and job growth for the parents. And then the third one, healthy food and nutrition, including family, parent engagement classes in food preparation, learning how to make fruit kebabs, learning how to substitute out things for sugar. Many families come here healthy because they have their indigenous foods, but all they are surrounded by here is fast food and little bodegas, and they can't buy decent things to make a home. So health and mental health, extended day and jobs, and healthy food.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I would now like to open it up to questions. So we hope to hear from anyone who has a question, and then I will repeat it so Lisa can hear it. And if you have a specific person that you'd like the answer from, let us know. Otherwise, we'll let our panelists jump in. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
So I guess this is for Jana. I heard you use the word dignity several times, and I'm interested in when you were able to increase the family engagement from 27% to 97%, what specific things do you think changed that enabled you to make that dramatic shift?
So wait, I have to just, so Chris's question is about the whole concept of dignity that Jana had mentioned, and in her example of the change at Hoover, the dramatic change in family engagement, what was involved in that change of approach and attitude that made a difference?
Thanks for the question. I think there were some significant changes in practice that really mattered. So one piece Meredith already highlighted, which is recognizing that all families care about their kids, and that all parents, to the extent that they can, want to provide for their children and want their children to be successful. And so recognizing that that's the starting place, and recognizing that people are already doing a tremendous amount within their means to support their children was really important. And so what, in practice, what that looks like, for example, is starting parent, teacher, child conferences, not with only data about what's wrong, but also having parents have the opportunity to do a little bit of inventory work before the conference, like a teacher would do, and recognize what they're already doing at home. So we had a very robust inventory form that we did not have one parent who did not have many things that they were doing at home to support their child. And it was a robust list. So there were also a lot of things on the list that any parent would have as new ideas. And so parents were able to have this opportunity to prepare for the parent-teacher conferences, again, similarly to how a teacher would. And the teachers then also had an opportunity not only to name what was going well, but some new things that they were going to try that they hadn't yet tried. And so again, recognizing, doing that own sort of inventory work for themselves. And those, sometimes these parent-teacher conferences were the only time that a family member came onto the campus. And the numbers, particularly for middle school, were really, the percentage was really low. And so the encounter that a family had, particularly as a first encounter, was really important in these conferences. And so we looked at sites of encounter and aimed to change them to be a lot more respectful and more partnership oriented. Another piece that I think was really important is that the outreach that was done and is done today is primarily done family to family. In a traditional family engagement model, staff would be calling, whether it's with an automated kind of a robocall or doing individual calls, but usually the traditional model is staff to family. And in this context, we had a community mobilization team of people who received all sorts of opportunity, but also training and outreach. And these family members called other family members. So third grade families called third grade families, eighth grade families called eighth grade families, and started with the common why somebody would get involved in whatever they were outreaching for on a very personal level. So saying things along the lines of, I really want the best for my kid, and I have just learned about this food project, and I know that it's important that students come with the best nutrition possible, and so I've gotten involved in this project and it's made a big difference in my household. So I want to talk to you about it and then invite you to come and make up that personal connection. A third piece of many that I'll just offer for today is that we also really built on bright spots. So looking at where are families actively engaging and why is that happening there? And looking at the practice of what does it look like in terms of outreach, in terms of welcome, in terms of reception, in terms of how a meeting is organized. There were meetings on campus that were really working and meetings that weren't. And so looked at what are the practices that are really engaging people as equal partners where it's respectful and dignity-based, and then how do we replicate that? And also set really tangible goals that everybody was working towards together, recognizing that the school couldn't do it alone. So those are just a few of the things.
Yeah, great.
So has anyone done a study to compare the cost of delivering education and these services in this way through community schools versus traditional education programs?
So the question is a comparison between the cost of delivering a community school with wraparound services versus a traditional school that might not be offering the same array of family support.
Right, but you might even include the cost of those other services that might be in the community if you didn't have the school this way too. I mean, right? If you have a wraparound program for nutrition, that may reduce the cost of other nutrition programs in the community. So you can include that.
So comparing that to costs that are also borne by the community in terms of supporting low-income families. Lisa, do you have some, I think you had some information about...
I do. I have some data from the National Training Center for Community Schools. This is housed at the Children's Aid Society in New York, and they've done studies. Most of the studies were done in New York, but a lot of the costs are very comparable now to California, particularly the Bay Area. And so the study done by the Children's Aid Society indicated that the cost of delivering comprehensive community school supports and services to a child, a student for the entire year, a student and their family for the entire year, was approximately 50% of the annual daily cost of educating the child, the school district. So it's about 50% more. But another study that they did, a follow-on study to that, indicated that those supports and services extrapolated over several years ended up returning an 11-fold cost savings, to the point of the gentleman in the back of the room, the cost savings over time, 11-fold. And so you're spending 50% more per year than you would normally at your school district, but the over time ROI is 11-fold. And I know that's even higher with early care and education, and perhaps other panelists can speak to that. I mean, we could go back to the period preschool in many, many studies. I think it's up to 17-to-1 ROI with intensive early child care and education.
Thanks. Meredith, you're nodding your head. Did you have anything that you wanted to...
The investment in early childhood alone is, as Lisa is mentioning, just has an unbelievable return on investment. And I do think one of the fundamental issues we have is society captures the benefits and reducing costs. I mean, the recidivism, welfare payments, like all the things that happen into adulthood. And so how do we get communities to understand that these investments, which don't seem urgent, like investment in child health care, children cost nothing to keep healthy, but they cost a lot when they have chronic disease or mental health issues down the road, and we haven't. So we know the data. It's just that our delightful policymakers haven't put it all together to create the right systems. And I will say that even within the K-12 range, the impact of, if you have trauma, 4 or more traumatic experiences, you are 30 times more likely to have a behavioral or learning issue. And so if we don't address that, and the cost of a student in special education, it's off the charts. Just our school system alone would recoup the cost if they were to make these earlier investments.
And let me add the cost of juvenile incarceration right now. Contra Costa County, for example, Contra Costa County is not as expensive a county as Santa Clara or San Mateo. The cost of 1 year of incarceration in juvenile hall is $143,000. So if we neglect trauma-informed instruction, if we neglect the deep mental health interventions, if we neglect restorative justice, then we're going to pay for it on the other end.
Jana, you wanted to add something?
Just something quickly to both of these strong points would be that in the Redwood City context, as in many community school locations, a lot of the services that are offered on campus are in kind to the school district. In other words, and like actually it was part of your question, that some of these services would be offered somewhere else, but instead they're offered on the school site. And so it's very strategic for the partner as well. So for example, in the county context, there are public benefits analysts who are in a county building somewhere, it's much easier for them to be in the contact with the families who need their support when they're at their child's school. And the numbers in Redwood City in terms of leverage dollars are now a little bit dated, but the last time that we looked at it, for every dollar that the Redwood City School District invested in a community school, 17 were leveraged. In other words, when they're setting up this context of having the community school, it brings in resources that then directly affect and improve the lives of their students. One thing that I think is important to recognize is that's particularly important for under-resourced districts like the Redwood City School District. In that the students have the needs and have the strengths, but they have their challenges regardless of whether those needs are met or not. And the district does not have the resources to meet all of those needs alone. And so this is a model that's enabled them to begin to meet some of the community needs that is out of the scope and out of their sphere of influence.
Yes, I did. Thank you. And then Carol, did you still have a question too?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go here and we'll go on next.
I was glad, Lisa, that you talked about the context of community schools and how up until 1978 we had some really great resources, and of course you were alluding to Proposition 13 and its effects on not just education but actually on contributing to the housing crisis. I was curious if you could each address how, if at all, you or your organization sees a role in trying to change Proposition 13. There have been many efforts underway, of course maintaining your 501c3 status, but do you see a role for advocacy among nonprofits in that area?
I think we feel part of our mission, we really do want to serve directly the kids in East Palo Alto, but our entire mission is to change public systems and policy by having a proof point for what's possible when you can do these things for kids. And that's why the data collection is so important to us. And so I think that we really are starting by just trying to show what is possible and having really good data behind it and show that amazing things can happen, not just for children, because even if you don't care about children, you should care about the economy. And these cost studies in particular are really relevant, and so we are not particularly taking our own advocacy role, but we are specifically setting ourselves up to be able to contribute to the policy conversation around this.
Within the Redwood City 2020 context, as a collective impact organization, frankly, there's been more focus on the local context than on the state or the national. Of course, the state and the national directly affect the local. And I just went to a Cradle to Career conference last week in Phoenix. in which many practitioners who are involved in this collective impact work that spans from birth through adulthood are actively looking at the policy question, that if we're aiming to improve the systems in our local context, and they tend to be geographically focused initiatives. So for example, this one is focused on Redwood City and North Fair Oaks. Yes, are there practices that we're honing here that are transferable and that we share? Absolutely. And do we learn from other communities? Yes, that too. But as a movement, I think that we in collective impact need to really look at it. We need to think about how are we ensuring that we're devoting time to the policy advocacy in addition to doing the important work locally. And so it's something that I feel committed to really looking at and to looking at in partnership. Certainly in California, we are part of the children's movement and other organizations that are aiming to create policy change here. But again, our focus and often most of our energy and attention is focused here.
I wonder what Lisa might think from a national level.
Lisa, the question was, what are nonprofits doing specifically about bringing about change in Prop 13 and more generally in terms of supporting policy and advocacy work to support more intelligent use of funding and being able to work in support the more systemic work that community schools are doing.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking online right now at my smartphone because I know that there have been a number of efforts to repeal Prop 13. And I know that they keep getting knocked down, but I would suggest that if people could do a good internet search. There was an article in March of 2017 around how broken it is.
Okay.
I will say, I can't quote it right now because I didn't know the question was going to come up, but there's a lot going on. But I did want to provide one figure to the point that was made just a couple of minutes ago, and that is, when I was running a project in San Mateo County in the early 90s, before I ran the California Healthy Start California Healthy Start Initiative and then After School Initiative, we did a study in San Mateo County at the cost savings of having a social worker or a benefit analyst or an income maintenance worker or a drug and alcohol provider or a family support worker, family care worker, we called it outstationed to a school where we took one classroom and converted it to cubicles. And at that time, in the mid-90s, the estimate was having a county worker being based at the school rather than occupying an office in a county building saves $10,000 a year. If it saved $10,000 a year in the 90s, it's going to be saving a whole lot more because there's all the infrastructure costs that are picked up by the school, water, lights, garbage, parking, and simply not having a cubicle to have to maintain for someone. So there are many, many cost savings. I think it's worth somebody doing a big study on the comprehensive cost savings of full service community schools.
Okay.
Who else has a question?
We have one last question.
Yeah, Carol? Not
I think she had to leave.
Okay. Well, let's do it. Judy?
Just looking at how we can leverage best practices, and let's just start with the early childhood and preschool. You know, we have one of our partners, Lance Forrest, has been working with China, a big collaborative with the government and nonprofit and family foundations to create curriculum to go out into the rural communities and establish preschools. I keep asking, why don't we in the United States have best practices for, if we're going to go to preschool for all, now's the time for us to be looking at what are the best practices, where's the curriculum that we can leverage for beginning teachers, and then they can take the ribbon and run and make it better. But I just see everybody is reinventing the wheel, and there's not a leverage of what's really working. And so I think we thought leaders can really help us maybe think through how can we come up with something that we can share, and especially for everybody. Does anybody think, are we thinking along those lines?
So the question is, do you know anyone who's thinking along the lines of developing a best practices guide and curriculum to support early learning and preschool, so that each community that's doing this is not reinventing the wheel each time?
I think part of the problem in preschool is there is best practice work going on. We know you need a strong curriculum, but particularly in preschool, it is a much bigger issue of talent than it is curriculum. And so there are plenty of curriculums out there now. We would argue that are not culturally responsive, but there are plenty of curriculums that would drive good results. It's that we pay early childhood teachers half of what we pay elementary school teachers, and we already pay elementary school teachers half of what they should be paid. And so we have a dearth of talent in the sector. And then for schools like what we're talking about, when you deal with really high trauma populations, you are particularly ill-equipped to handle that. And so so I think there is good work and good practices, but you have schools who have access to all of that material and can't execute it. So I would argue that's the actual bigger problem, and it's much harder. Obviously, scaling human beings is harder than written documents, and so I think that continues to be an issue. And I would imagine the same is true of community schools generally. We know a lot about what works, but the relationships, the schools, the particular community, who's in the building, the mindsets, probably make a huge difference of whether they're successful or not.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. So then, are we coming up with ways of training teachers, new teachers, and attracting them? I mean, I know it's the pay scale, but also, do we have colleges that are really having some best practices how to train?
I don't think so. I would love if somebody, maybe in this room, would be interested in that as an issue. I think it's happening in the K-12 space. I think early childhood is, if you think about how we treat educators in this country, and then, because I was in high schools before, we treat early educators so much worse than we treat all educators who are already treated really poorly, even though they have the most important job in this country. It's also a completely different training system than the K-12 space. And so I think it's a huge need. I hope there are some people who are taking it on, but I do think it has to also have that end goal of, if you prepare people really well and recruit talented people to go into jobs where then they're paid $25,000 a year to have a life-changing impact on a child, how are we going to, even though we have great training programs, who are we going to recruit into that role?
Can I offer a couple of economic points,
Yeah,
footnotes to that? So in these studies that were done around the sort of the golden era of American education, 1958 to 1978, they also tracked the fact that up until 1978, teachers were earning in the top, they were earning at the 80th percentile or higher of professionals whose work required a fifth-year degree. Now they are earning at the 17th percentile. So it's flipped. The teachers were in the top 20% and now they're in the bottom 20% of pay. And this is across the United States. Also, during that period of time, from 58 to 78, if an entry-level worker in any company or corporation made about $10,000 a year, some of the highest paid CEOs only made a 10-fold increase, like maybe $100,000 a year, not a 100-fold increase or a 1,000-fold increase. So the disparities the economic disparities have grown just exponentially. And so on the lower end of that, believe it or not, are teachers, firefighters, police, carpenters, all of that, but they used to be at a much higher level. So the very economy, the policy issues around economy and how it has gotten stretched in this unforgivable way, and how it continues to punish the people that make under $100,000 a year is also part of the problem. And the way that we value, like it's been said, value our teachers, and the fact that we do not have universal preschool across the United States. It's unfathomable that a country that is not a third world country does not have universal preschool across the United States.
Well, on that sobering note, I think we have to end, but I hope you will join me in thanking Jana, Meredith, and Lisa for, this has really been so informative. And